We make it look easy and that's our job. People assume it must be, or that it's not actually as rigorous as a sport. And they don't realize until they actually attend a class just how challenging it is in the body. And some would say, many people would say, that it is the most taxing sport, art sport, of any of the sports, because it demands so much of the body in all capacities, not just a focus on power or endurance. It's everything. It's flexibility, it's endurance, it's coordination, it's speed. It's all in one package. So biggest misconception is that dancers are delicate, and we certainly are not. It is so important. I mean, traditionally, unfortunately, classical ballet has been steeped in centuries of colonialism and white dominated patriarchy, to like be completely honest. And the challenge right now is to take that centuries old discipline and turn it on its head, and open it up so that it's inclusive to anybody, all ages, all walks of life, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of background. It really, dance is a universal language, and it's a way for us to build our communities. It's a way to get back to what really matters. Our forms of communication extend so far beyond spoken word, and bringing it back to the body is a way to make that communication universal. So I think it's really, really, really important. Are creative roadblocks on both sides. I'd say the creative roadblocks on stage, as I mentioned before, a lot of it is tied into to funding, your limitations of what you can actually do on the stage. Um, but in film and TV, I'd say the roadblocks are time. In dance, to choreograph, if you really want to get the process with the dancers where you collaborate and you get into the room and you toss ideas back and forth and you explore, it's like a sculptor, shaping the clay and changing things, tweaking once you get to know the performers a little better. That's where choreography for stage is super enjoyable, because it's a deeper process. Whereas film and television, it happens so quickly, and it's exciting. But there are certainly a lot of times where I've sat back and thought, oh, if I had more time, I would have added this, or I would have changed this, or I would have, loved to get to know that performer a bit more in terms of their flavor, their style, to be able to pull that out. But we've got to, in TV, they're writing as they're shooting. It's not written ahead of time. Then you get to think about it and figure it all out and then shoot. The next episode is being written as you're choreographing. And I would work in the writer's room as well with the writers, because I was the dance consultant. So I would give them feedback on, the language they were using and what would actually happen in the dance world. But it was happening so quickly that it's just like a snowball effect. And then you sit back and you go, holy crap, what just happened? Like, I can't believe we pulled that off. But the satisfaction of the theater is that you really get to sit in it and live in it for longer. Um, I love both equally for different reasons. My first love, obviously, is the theater, because that's where I started, and I will always want to be creating work for the stage. Um, the the challenge of theater, I mean, you can break it down to as pragmatic as there's not as much funds as there is when you're working in television film, so you're limited in terms of the bells and whistles that you can add to a production, and it just pares down to pure movement. I mean, you can add interesting sets and a beautiful score, but it really is just about the story you're telling and the movement. When you get into film and television, there are so many other elements involved, but you have the capacity also to play with perspective to play with envisioning how you choreograph a phrase from a 360 perspective, from a bird's eye view, from slow motion, like all these interesting elements that you can add when you're working in film. But it is tremendously challenging in terms of the timeline. Everything is, changes at the 11th hour, and then, go, 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 go. And then you wait, and then go, 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 go. And you're working insane hours. Whereas in the theater, it's more of a methodical progression. The rehearsal process is quite long. You get a lot of time in the studio, and then you get a lot of time on stage, tech rehearsals and dress rehearsals, and then perform. Whereas TV and film, you might get a script, not always, but sometimes you get a script like 2 days before, and you've got to throw it together quickly. So just thinking on your feet a bit more in film and TV, but you have the benefit of playing with all these really interesting ways to present dance by shooting different angles. And then I get to work closely with the director. So I was the head choreographer on a Netflix show called Tiny Pretty Things in 2019. And that was one of the most interesting things, was sitting down in a dance meeting with the different directors beforehand and planning every shot and how we would approach telling the story, but, respecting the dance at the same time, figuring out how to express the underlying story at the same time. So yeah, I was kind of wearing many hats. I was casting the performers. I was figuring out all the coaching team coming in. So all the ballet teachers, teaching a lot of classes myself, bringing in the accompanists, the pianists, scheduling all of the rehearsals, choreographing much of it, curating guest choreographers from around the world, and then just on the day on set shooting. So it was a lot. And I would do it again in a heartbeat, because there's nothing quite like it. I mean, you think it's beautiful as it's being shot, and you're like, wow, we made something special. And then you go in the editing room. So I would sit with the editors and help them figure out which parts of the dance were the most exciting. And then the finished product was so much bigger and more beautiful than I could ever have imagined. What they do in the editing room is just extraordinary. So in the pandemic, all of us have gone through this, but the arts in particular, there are days where artists are asking ourselves why we're still doing it. I mean, you question, you think, okay, well, if I could go back in time, maybe I should have gone down a route that, took me into a field that would have been more protected from the ups and downs in the economy and things like pandemics. But really, when I come down to it, if I could go back, I wouldn't change it. It is, if the arts is something that you're pulled to, you're always going to be pulled to it. And that's not to say, dancers, it's like being an athlete at a certain point. It sounds crazy, but you reach an age that most people consider young for any other field. And you're like, oh, well, I'm ready to be put out to pasture. And people think, that's crazy, you're still so young. Well, not young for dance, not young for certain types of dance. Maybe you can continue on in other forms of dance longer, but it's like an athlete. I mean, I look at these guys on the ice in the Leafs, and I'm like, wait a minute, Joe Thornton is like my age, and people call him Old Man Joe. That's really scary. But I mean, it's true. It's such a condensed lifespan when you're doing an extreme sport, and dance is an extreme sport. So I think if you have this passion and you need to stay in the arts, dancers have to be supported in finding ways to continue what they're doing, but just with a shift in perspective and a shift in focus.